Hello and welcome to Gloomy Realm. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that guide you beyond the ordinary and into forgotten places where darkness quietly lingers, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable. Let your body grow still and allow the sounds of the outside world to gently fade into silence. Tonight, the mist begins to rise, the old paths awaken, and a forgotten realm opens before you. So close your eyes, listen carefully, leave the waking world behind, and wander through the gloomy realm. Story 1. Last summer, my friends Greg, Ned, and I decided to go on one final camping trip before returning to our respective colleges for senior year. We had all spent most of the summer working, taking classes, or dealing with family responsibilities, so the trip felt like our last chance to relax before life became serious again. We chose a quiet campground several hours away from home, deep inside a wide forest surrounded by mountains, rivers, and hiking trails. None of us had been there before, which made it feel more like an adventure. The area was far from any large towns, and phone service disappeared almost as soon as we entered the forest. For the first few days, everything went perfectly. We hiked through the mountains, followed a river to a natural swimming hole, and spent entire afternoons jumping from rocks into the cold water. At night, we sat around the campfire, drinking beer, smoking a little weed, and telling ghost stories beneath a sky filled with more stars than I had ever seen. Greg always told the funniest stories. Ned usually tried to explain why every supernatural event had a logical cause. I was somewhere between the two. I did not truly believe in ghosts or monsters, but I enjoyed imagining that something strange might be hiding beyond the light of the fire. By the second to last night, however, I had stopped enjoying that idea. The strange events began during a hike. We had chosen a trail that climbed one of the smaller mountains near our campground. It was not supposed to be difficult, but the August heat made the climb harder than expected. The trail twisted through a thick forest of pine trees. Some were tall and narrow, while others were short and bent by years of wind and snow. We had been hiking for about 30 minutes when I noticed a birch tree standing beside the trail. There was nothing frightening about it. It was simply a tree. Still, it caught my attention because it was the only birch I had seen since entering the forest. Its white bark stood out among the dark trunks of the pines, long strips of bark peeled away from its surface, curling like thin pieces of paper. Some of its leaves had already begun turning yellow, even though summer had not ended. It looked completely out of place, like someone had taken it from another forest and planted it there. As I walked past, I noticed a heart carved into the front of its trunk. There were no initials inside it. It was only a heart, cut deeply into the pale bark. For some reason, I slowed down and stared at it. The heart did not look old. The cuts were dark and clean, as though someone had carved it recently, yet we had not seen another person on the trail. "Sam, you coming?" Greg called from farther ahead. I looked away from the tree. "Yeah," I answered. At the time, I did not think much about it. People carved names and hearts into trees all the time. I told myself it was nothing unusual and hurried after my friends. For the next hour, we continued up the mountain, sharing jokes and talking about our latest year of college. Greg told us about an accident that had nearly happened during one of his engineering labs. A heavy pendulum had been held up by a safety latch, but the latch had not been secured properly. Greg had reached beneath it to adjust something, and one of his classmates had noticed the problem just in time. "If that thing had dropped," Greg said, "my hand would have been destroyed. That would have made writing your final exams difficult," Ned said. Greg shook his head seriously. "That's not what worries me. It was my dominant hand. My private life would have been ruined. Ned and I laughed harder than the joke deserved. We were tired, hot, and slightly dehydrated. At that point, almost anything sounded funny. Not long afterward, we reached the top of the mountain. The view was incredible. A wide river curved through the valley below us, shining in the afternoon sun. Thousands of pine trees covered the hills in every direction. In the distance, the taller mountains rose into a blue haze. We dropped our backpacks and stood near the edge, taking pictures and enjoying the breeze. I turned slowly, wanting to see the entire view. That was when I noticed another birch tree. It stood among the pines near the top of the mountain. My excitement disappeared immediately. "Hey," I said, "do you guys see that?" Greg and Ned followed my finger. "The tree?" Greg asked. "Yes, the tree," I replied, already annoyed. "The white one. Doesn't it look strange? There haven't been any other birches around here." Ned shrugged. "Trees grow in forests, Sam, I know that. But this one looks exactly like..." I stopped speaking as I moved closer. A heart had been carved into the trunk. It was in the same position as the heart on the first tree, about halfway up the front. The shape was almost identical too. The curves and uneven lines looked as though the same person had carved both. This heart, however, had a letter inside it. A capital B had been cut into the left side. I stared at it, and a cold feeling moved across my skin. Suddenly, I felt as though someone was standing behind me. Not Greg or Ned. Something else. Something hidden just beyond the trees. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Only my friends, the rocks, and endless rows of pines. "You all right?" Ned asked. "Yeah," I said too quickly. "I'm fine." I walked away from the birch and returned to them. "It is only a tree," I told myself. We stayed at the top for another 40 minutes. We ate the sandwiches we had prepared that morning and drank the warm beers Ned had carried in his backpack. While we rested, we talked about senior year and our plans after graduation. Greg said he was going to study in New Zealand during the autumn semester. Ned expected to have almost no free time because he would be studying for the MCAT while working part-time at Greenhaven Nursing Facility near his college. I told them about my plan to visit every bookstore within 30 miles of campus. Greg said that sounded like the most boring adventure anyone had ever planned. By the time we reached our campground, the sun had started sinking behind the trees. It suddenly hit me that the trip was almost over. The next day would be our last full day in the forest. We planned to hike Mount Woodchuck, the tallest mountain in the county, and then leave the following morning. That night, we built a large fire and opened the rest of our beer. We sat around drinking, eating snacks, and remembering stupid things we had done over the years. Greg had just finished telling us about the night he climbed onto the roof of an urgent care building while completely drunk when I decided to take a leak. I walked a short distance into the woods, keeping the orange light of the campfire visible behind me. The darkness beyond the fire was thick and almost solid. I could hear insects buzzing, leaves moving, and the distant rush of the river. I unzipped my jeans and began relieving myself. To pass the time, I looked between the trees. Then my heart skipped a beat. A birch tree stood about 15 feet in front of me. The firelight reflected from its white, peeling bark. A carved heart was visible on its trunk. Inside the heart was the letter B, followed by a plus sign. B plus, I stopped breathing. It looked exactly like the tree from the mountain. The same peeling bark. The same heart. The same uneven carving. For a moment, I wondered if it was the same tree. That was impossible. The mountain was miles away. A strange feeling moved through my body. I felt cold and hot at the same time, as though waves of heat and ice were passing beneath my skin. The tree seemed to move closer. At first, I thought the firelight was creating an illusion. The shadows shifted as the flames moved, making the tree appear to sway. But it was not only swaying, it was coming toward me. Its roots made no sound. Its trunk remained perfectly upright. Yet with every blink, the distance between us became smaller. I wanted to step back, but my legs would not move. I stood frozen, held in place by fear and a dark curiosity I could not understand. The birch stopped about 5 feet away. A long strip of bark had peeled from the trunk above the carved heart. The missing bark formed a curved shape. It looked like a smile. The branches moved gently in the wind. The leaves whispered together, sounding like water flowing over stones. Then I heard a voice. It did not come from the forest. It came from inside my head. Just a little taste. Don't be shy. My right arm began to rise. I was not controlling it. My hands slowly reached toward the tree. My fingers trembled as they moved closer to the white bark. I knew I should run. I knew something was terribly wrong, but part of me wanted to touch it. I wanted to know how the bark felt. I wanted to press my palm against the carved heart. My fingertips were only inches away when a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around and nearly fell. Greg stood behind me, staring with wide, frightened eyes. "Dude," he said, "it does not take 20 minutes to pee." "What are you doing?" I stared at him. 20 minutes? Yeah, you disappeared. We were about to come looking for you. That made no sense. I had been standing there for only a few seconds. At least, that was what it felt like. I forced a smile, hoping to calm him. "Sorry, I was just enjoying the scenery while making room for more beer." Greg did not smile. "Right, whatever. Just do not do that again. You scared us." "Yeah," I said. "Sorry, give me a second to finish." He hesitated before walking back to the fire. I zipped my jeans and fastened my belt. Then I slowly looked toward the birch tree. It was back where I had first seen it, 15 feet away. For a moment, I thought I had imagined everything. Then I saw the carving. There was now another letter after the plus sign. B+S, my name is Sam. Sam. Greg called from the campsite. "Hurry up. The s'mores are disappearing." I rushed back to the fire. When I reached the clearing, I turned and looked into the forest one last time. The birch stood between the dark pines. I could not explain how I knew, but it was watching me. Above the carved heart, the peeled bark formed a wide smile. I barely slept that night. Every small sound woke me. A branch snapping in the distance, the wind moving against the tent, an animal walking through dry leaves. Each time I opened my eyes, I expected to see a white branch pushing through the tent fabric. When morning finally arrived, I felt exhausted. While Greg and Ned prepared breakfast, I walked into the forest to pee. In truth, I wanted to see whether the birch was still there. It was gone. Only pine trees stood beyond the campsite. I released a long breath and almost laughed. I convinced myself that the strange experience had been caused by beer, weed, exhaustion, and darkness. Maybe I had seen an ordinary tree and imagined the rest. The missing time was harder to explain, but I decided not to think about it. It had to be a dream. It was our last full day, and we wanted to enjoy every minute. We began with another mountain hike. At the top, we ate beef jerky and admired the view. On the way back down, I realized that I had not seen a single birch tree. The thought made me feel better. In the afternoon, we visited a nearby river where years of flowing water had shaped the rocks into natural slides. We spent hours sliding down the smooth stone into a deep swimming hole below. For a while, I forgot about the birch completely. When the sun lowered toward the tops of the pine trees, we returned to the car and drove back to camp. Greg began packing some of our equipment so we would have less work the next morning. Ned and I prepared dinner. That evening, we ate hot dogs and roasted marshmallows over the fire. Afterward, we leaned back in our camping chairs with full stomachs and tired smiles. The night was calm. The fire cracked softly between us. Sparks rose into the darkness and vanished. Above the trees, the stars looked cold and distant. We started talking about returning to our normal lives. Greg wondered whether studying in New Zealand would change him. Ned complained about the months of studying ahead. I admitted that I was not ready for college to end because I had no idea what I wanted to do afterward. It was not the happiest conversation, but it felt honest. I looked at my friends across the fire. Their familiar faces glowed orange in the flames. Greg wore his usual foolish grin. Ned looked tired but peaceful. I felt close to them in a simple, almost ancient way. 3 friends in the wilderness gathered around fire just as people had done for thousands of years. Then their faces changed. Their skin became white. Their smiles stretched wider. Their cheeks began peeling like bark. Just a little taste, baby, come on. I won't bite. I jumped out of my chair. Greg and Ned both jerked in surprise. What the hell, Sam? Ned asked. Are you okay? I stared beyond them into the forest. Branches crossed one another in the darkness. Leaves shifted in the wind. I searched for white bark and that terrible carved smile. There was nothing there. I let out a long, exhausted breath. My friends looked up at me, waiting for an explanation. Suddenly, I began to laugh. At first, it was a quiet, nervous laugh. I tried to stop it, but the harder I tried, the louder it became. Within seconds, I was bent over, shaking uncontrollably. Sorry, I managed to say. I thought I saw something. I continued laughing for almost a minute. Tears ran down my face. My stomach hurt, and I could barely breathe. Greg and Ned did not laugh with me. They looked frightened. When I finally gained control, I told them the woods were getting to me. I said I was tired and needed sleep. Neither of them argued. I went into the tent early and climbed into my sleeping bag. For a long time, I lay awake, listening to the fire and the quiet voices outside. Eventually, Greg and Ned entered the tent. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep because I did not want to discuss what had happened. I could feel them watching me. Neither of them said anything. After several minutes, they climbed into their sleeping bags. Soon, their breathing became slow and heavy. Ned began snoring. I listened to them for almost an hour before sleep finally came. When I woke the next morning, the tent was empty. For a few seconds, I lay still, trying to remember where I was. Then, I heard the sound of a metal skillet near the fire and the low voices of my friends. Everything seemed normal. I changed into clean clothes, brushed my teeth, and fixed my hair using the small mirror hanging inside the tent. Then, I put my phone in my pocket and unzipped the tent door. Bright sunlight hit my eyes. I stepped outside and walked toward my friends. As my vision adjusted, I looked around the campground. My blood went cold. The pine forest was gone. The entire campground was surrounded by birch trees. Hundreds of them stood in every direction. Their white trunks formed tight rows around the campsite. Their bark hung in long peeling strips. Yellow leaves trembled above me, even though the day was warm and still. There was no path between them, no road, no sign of the pine trees that had surrounded us the night before. I looked at Greg and Ned. They sat near the fire as if nothing had changed. "Hey," I whispered. "Guys, we need to get out of." My voice disappeared when I saw their faces clearly. Their skin was peeling. Large pieces hung from their cheeks, foreheads, and arms. Beneath the loose skin was a pale wooden surface marked with thin, dark lines. Their movements were stiff and unnatural. Every time they turned, their bodies made faint creaking sounds. They looked like something had studied my friends and tried to rebuild them from wood. Both of them raised their heads. Their eyes were gone. In their place were smooth wooden shapes the same color as their faces. They had no pupils, no whites, nothing that should have allowed them to see. Still, I knew they were looking directly at me. Their featureless faces seemed filled with pure, excited happiness. I took a step backward. Then I remembered the car. I searched for the keys and saw them resting on a short piece of wood beside the fire. They were on my side. "Good morning, Sam," Ned said. A huge smile spread across his face. It contained far too many teeth. His voice sounded nothing like his real voice. It was dry and cracked, with soft whistling sounds between the words, like air passing through a wooden flute. I forced myself to smile. "What's up, bro?" I took one small step toward the keys. Ned stopped pretending to cook. He placed the spatula down and stared at me. Greg moved beside him. A wide smile appeared on Greg's face, too. I looked at them, then at the keys, then back at them. Their heads turned toward the keys at the same time. They knew what I was planning. I lunged forward, grabbed the keys, and ran. Behind me, I heard chairs fall over and wooden feet striking the ground. I raced past the tent and reached the car. My hand shook so badly that I nearly dropped the keys. I yanked open the driver's door, climbed inside, and started the engine. Greg and Ned came running around the tent. They moved horribly. Their knees bent backward and twisted farther than any human joint should. Their arms swung stiffly at their sides. Each step produced a snapping sound. Even with those broken movements, they were fast. I shifted into reverse just as Ned reached the car. He grabbed the rear bumper. I screamed and pressed the accelerator. The car shot backward onto the road. Ned held on, his wooden fingers digging into the metal. I slammed the brakes, shifted into drive, and pushed the accelerator to the floor. The car jumped forward. For several seconds, Ned dragged behind me. Then his hands slipped. The car went over his body. It felt like driving over a speed bump. A loud cracking sound came from beneath the wheels, like a tree branch breaking in half. I looked in the mirror, expecting to see blood. There was none. Ned lay in the road, his body broken and splintered. Then he began to stand. I turned my attention forward. The road ahead was closing. The rows of birch trees on both sides were bending inward. Their trunks leaned over the road, narrowing the opening. Branches reached toward one another like fingers. I pressed the accelerator harder. The engine roared as the car raced forward. The gap became smaller and smaller. White trunks filled my vision. For one terrible moment, I thought the trees would trap me. Then the car shot through the opening. The birches disappeared behind me. Pine trees returned on both sides of the road. I kept driving, barely able to breathe. When I looked into the rearview mirror, the birch forest stood in the distance like a white wall. Greg and Ned were at the edge of it. They waved at me with stiff, crooked arms. Both of their heads tilted slightly to the left. Ned's arms and chest were cracked and splintered from the car, but his face showed no pain. He was smiling. Between them stood the birch tree. The heart was carved into its trunk. V plus S above, it was the peeling bark smile. As I drove away, one of its white branches lifted slowly into the air. I swear it waved goodbye. I have never gone camping again. After graduating, I moved to a large city and stayed there. I avoid forests, hiking trails, and quiet country roads. I do not visit parks unless they are crowded. I especially avoid birch trees. I never found out what happened to Greg and Ned. Their families reported them missing. Search teams went through the campground and surrounding mountains, but they found no sign of them. The official report said our campsite had been abandoned. The tent was gone. Our equipment was gone. Even the remains of the fire were gone. The search team also said there were no birch trees anywhere near the campground. Sometimes I wonder whether I truly escaped. Once every few months, I have the same nightmare. It begins with tapping. At first, the sound seems to come from inside my head. Tap, 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 then I wake in my bedroom. Everything looks normal. The room is dark, and the city lights glow through the curtains. The tapping usually comes from the window to my right. I do not want to look, but my head always turns. On the other side of the glass is a white birch branch. It taps the window slowly. Behind it, pressed close to the glass, is that peeling bark smile. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. My body begins to harden. My skin turns pale and rough. My arms become stiff. My fingers stretch into thin branches. When I try to call for help, the only sound I make is a low, haunted whistle. Roots burst from my feet and push into the floor. More roots grow from my hands, chest, and eyes. They spread through the walls and wrap around the furniture. The voice enters my head again. Come on, baby, just a taste. That's good. Won't this be nice? The roots fill my mouth. You and I forever. They push into my ears. Together forever in my forest. The last thing I hear is the slow, steady tapping of the birch branch against my window. Tap, tap, tap. Then I wake up. At least, I think I do. Story 2. I keep going back to the moment I woke up on the living room floor. I have replayed it so many times that the memory no longer feels like something that happened to me. It feels more like a scene from a film I have watched again and again, each time hoping to notice one small detail that explains everything. But every time I return to it, I am left with the same questions. I still cannot understand how I got there, how long I had been unconscious, or what had happened before I opened my eyes. The first thing I felt was pain. My head was pounding with a deep, heavy ache that seemed to sit behind my eyes. It was not a sharp pain. It was slow and dull, spreading through my skull like pressure building underwater. Every sound around me seemed distant. Every thought came late, as if my mind had to travel through thick mud before it could reach me. I tried to move, but my body felt unusually heavy. My arms and legs did not seem to belong to me. They were still attached, and I could feel them against the cold floor, but they would not respond properly. It was like waking up inside someone else's body and not knowing how to control it. For a few seconds, I did not know where I was. The floor beneath my cheek was hard and cold. I could smell dust, old wood, and something metallic. My breathing sounded strange, wet and uneven. I tried to lift my head, but the pain behind my eyes became stronger, forcing me back down. Only one of my eyes would open. The other felt sealed shut. Something was running down the side of my face from above it. At first it felt warm. Then, as it reached my cheek and touched the cold floor, it stopped feeling warm at all. I knew it was blood, but my mind refused to say the word. I lay still and listened. There was no traffic outside, No voices from the street, no sound from the neighbors. The house was completely quiet except for the faint buzzing of the lamp and another sound I could not immediately recognize. Music, it was playing softly somewhere in the room. My head slowly rolled to one side, and the living room began to come into focus in broken pieces. First, I saw the bottom of the sofa. Then, the coffee table. Then, the rug, twisted near one corner, as if someone had dragged their foot across it. The room was lit by the small yellow lamp near the window. It was the lamp we used at night when one of us could not sleep. We used to leave it on so we could walk through the house without waking the other person. Its light had always made the room feel warm and safe. That night, it made the shadows look deeper. The music continued playing. I listened to it, confused by the familiar tune. I knew it, but my injured mind could not place it. The notes seemed to move through the room like a voice calling from another part of the house. Then I remembered. It was our song. The song from our wedding. The song we had chosen after weeks of arguing and laughing over every possible choice. You had wanted something old and romantic. I had wanted something that did not make me feel embarrassed in front of everyone. In the end, you won, like you usually did. And I had later admitted that you were right. It had played during our first dance. I could still remember holding you in the center of the hall, both of us nervous because everyone was watching. You had whispered that I was stepping on your dress. I had whispered back that your dress was trying to kill me. You laughed so hard that you nearly pulled us both to the floor. That memory should have comforted me. Instead, hearing the song in that dark room filled me with fear. I could not understand why it was playing. I did not know who had turned it on, how long it had been repeating, or how much of it had played while I lay unconscious on the floor. The thought that the song might have been playing the whole time while something moved around me made my stomach tighten. I tried to call your name. Only a weak breath came out. That was when I noticed something moving in the far corner of the room. At first, I thought it was only a shadow. The lamp was behind it, and the shape blended into the darkness near the wall. But then it moved again. It was dancing. Even now, I do not know how else to describe it. Its movements followed the music, but only slightly. It raised its arms, turned its body, and moved from one foot to the other as if it had watched people dance, but had never truly understood how human bodies worked. It reminded me of a child during their first ballet lesson. A child who had seen dancers on television and believed that throwing their arms outward and spinning was enough. There was something almost innocent in the way it tried. Almost, but every movement was wrong. Its arms stretched too far. Its shoulders turned before the rest of its body. Its head leaned at an angle that no living person would find comfortable. Sometimes its feet moved without its upper body following, and sometimes its body turned while its feet remained still. It did not look like a person dancing. It looked like something wearing the idea of a person. I could not see its face clearly. Its head was lowered, and its hair covered most of it. The light caught parts of its body as it moved, showing pale hands, thin wrists, and the shape of fabric moving around its legs. I noticed the dress before I allowed myself to understand what I was seeing. It was white. Long, soft layers of fabric moved across the floor as the figure turned. My mind tried to reject the truth. I told myself it was only a white dress. I told myself there were many dresses that could look similar in low light. Then it moved closer to the lamp. I saw the lace around the sleeves. I saw the small row of buttons down the back. I saw the slight tear near the bottom, the one caused when you caught the dress on the heel of your shoe during the wedding reception. It was your wedding dress. For 1 second, my whole body tried to react. My left leg twitched against the floor as if it wanted to push me up. My fingers scratched weakly at the wood. I wanted to stand. I wanted to call your name again. I wanted to believe that you were inside the dress. Even though I knew that was impossible, some part of me still hoped you were the reason everything was happening. I thought perhaps this was a dream, a hallucination, or some final kindness from my injured mind. I wanted the figure to turn around and reveal your face. I wanted you to smile at me and tell me I had fallen asleep on the floor again. But the figure kept dancing. It did not look at me. It moved in slow circles near the corner, copying the small, silly dance you used to do when you thought no one was watching. You had done that dance in the kitchen while waiting for water to boil. You had done it when you found a clean shirt you thought you had lost. You had done it whenever you needed a break from a serious conversation. Whenever life became too heavy, you would raise your arms, turn once, and move your feet in a ridiculous little pattern. You called it your escape dance. The thing in the wedding dress was doing it now. Not perfectly, not naturally, but close enough to make me feel sick. I watched it move while the wedding song played. Time lost all meaning. It might have danced for 1 minute or 20. My pain came in waves, dragging me toward unconsciousness and then allowing me to rise again. Each time my vision began to fade, I forced my open eye to focus on the figure. I was afraid that if I looked away, it would move closer. Then it stopped. The dress became still. The figure stood with its head lowered, listening to the music. Its body swayed gently from side to side, almost like it was remembering something. After a few seconds, it drifted across the room toward the shelf near the wall. We kept photographs there. Most of them were ordinary pictures from holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings. There was one of us standing near the sea. One of you holding a terrible birthday cake I had tried to make. One of our first apartment, back when we owned almost nothing except a mattress and 2 broken chairs. In the center of the shelf was our wedding photograph. It was taken after we cut the cake. You had icing on your cheek because I had placed it there when you were not looking. My tie was loose, your hair had started falling out of place, and we were both laughing. It was not the most perfect wedding picture. That was why we loved it. It looked real. The figure reached for it. Its hand moved slowly, its fingers spreading across the frame. The moment it lifted the photograph, the atmosphere in the room changed. Until then, the figure had filled the room with its presence. Even when it stood in the corner, I could feel it watching the space around it. The air had seemed thick and crowded, but when it held the picture, that feeling disappeared. It was as if the creature had stepped outside itself. It no longer seemed interested in me, the room, or even the music. Everything about it turned toward the photograph. It held the frame with both hands, its head lowered further. For a moment, it seemed completely alone. I had never seen sadness expressed without a face before. Yet I could feel it coming from the figure in waves. Its shoulders sank. The dress became still around it. Even the shadows seemed to gather closer. I wanted to ask what it was. I wanted to ask why it was wearing your dress. Most of all, I wanted to ask where you were. But my voice would not work. The pain in my head grew worse. My vision blurred, and the room began to tilt. I could feel myself slipping away again. I fought against it. I tried to hold on to the floor beneath me. I focused on the cold wood, the music, and the figure holding our photograph. But my body was becoming colder. It was not simple numbness. It felt as though something warm was leaving me from the inside. The cold started in my fingers and moved slowly through my hands, arms, and chest. My breathing became weaker. Somewhere in my mind, I understood that I might be dying. That thought should have frightened me. Instead, I only thought of you. I remembered the last morning we spent together. You had stood near the door, holding your bag, looking exhausted. We had argued the night before. Not about anything important. At least not anything that seemed important then. You said you needed space. You said you felt like you were disappearing inside our marriage. I accused you of being dramatic. Those words have lived inside me ever since. You left the house that morning and never came back. The police called later. There had been an accident. For weeks, I kept expecting to hear your key in the front door. I would wake at night and think I heard your footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes I cooked enough food for 2 people before remembering. I left your wedding dress hanging in the upstairs closet because I could not bear to move it. I left the photograph on the shelf. I left the lamp beside the window exactly where you had placed it. I told myself that keeping everything unchanged meant I had not lost you completely. The figure finally turned away from the photograph. It looked at me. I had expected a monster's face. I expected empty sockets, black teeth, or some twisted expression of hatred. Instead, the face was difficult to understand. It seemed to change in the weak light. At times it looked young, at times old, at times almost human. But its eyes were clear. That was the strangest part. After everything I had seen, it was the understanding in those eyes that frightened me most. It looked at me as if it knew exactly what I had lost. Not only knew it, but had lost the same thing. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then it spoke. Its voice did not come from its mouth in the usual way. It seemed to enter the room from several directions at once. Part of it sounded close to my ear. Another part sounded far away, like someone speaking from the end of a tunnel. "I miss her," it said. The figure looked down at the photograph. I miss her and her silly dance, the one she did when she wanted to escape her life for a moment. Its fingers tightened around the frame. When she wanted to escape your marriage, the words hurt more than the wound above my eye. I tried to move again, but my body would not answer. The figure looked back at me. "How is it possible," it asked, "to miss something we always thought was so far away?" I did not understand what it meant. Not then. Maybe I still do not. Perhaps it had watched us for years from some dark place beyond our world. Perhaps it had been near her during the moments when she felt alone. Perhaps it had wanted her before I lost her. Or perhaps it was something born from my grief, something created by guilt, loneliness, and all the words I wished I could take back. The figure placed the wedding photograph against its chest. The music continued playing behind it. Then it began walking toward me. It did not hurry. There was no reason for it to rush. I could not stand. I could barely breathe. Whatever it wanted to do, it knew I could not stop it. The wedding dress whispered across the floor. With every step, I noticed more details. Small stains marked the white fabric near the bottom. The lace was dark in places. One sleeve hung loosely, as if the arm beneath it was too thin. The smell of damp earth entered the room. I tried to pull myself backward, but my fingers only scraped weakly against the floor. The figure knelt beside me. Up close, its face was even harder to understand. It seemed unfinished, like features trying to form beneath skin that did not belong to them. But the eyes remained steady. Calm, sad, it placed the photograph gently on my chest. The wooden frame pressed against me. Through my open eye, I could see your face behind the glass. You were laughing, You looked alive. For one beautiful second, I forgot the figure beside me. I forgot the pain, the blood, and the coldness spreading through my body. I only saw you. Then the figure reached for my hand. Its fingers were colder than anything I had ever touched. It opened my palm and pressed something into it. I did not need to look down. The weight was familiar. The handle was hard and smooth. My fingers closed around it without permission. A knife. The kitchen knife. The same one you used when cutting our wedding cake in the photograph, though now its blade was wet and dark. The figure guided my hand upward until the knife entered my line of sight. The moment I saw it, something inside my memory broke open. Images returned in sudden flashes. The wedding song playing, the front door opening by itself, footsteps upstairs, the closet door standing wide. Your wedding dress no longer hanging inside, a shape moving behind me in the reflection of the window. A hand reaching toward my head. Pain. Then darkness. I still did not understand everything, but I understood enough. The figure was not there to kill me. Not exactly. It wanted something from me. It wanted me to choose. I looked from the knife to the photograph on my chest. Your smiling face stared back through the glass. The figure leaned closer. For one moment, its voice sounded almost like yours. Soon, it whispered. Then everything went dark again. I woke up this morning in the same place. Sunlight was coming through the window, bright and clear, filling the living room with a warmth that did not reach me. The wedding song had stopped. The lamp was still on. My head no longer hurt as much, but dried blood covered one side of my face. My body felt weak, and the cold had settled deep inside my bones. For a long time, I did not move. The room looked normal. The shelf stood near the wall. The sofa was where it had always been. Nothing was broken. There were no footprints, no torn fabric, and no sign that anyone else had been there. Your wedding dress was gone. Our photograph was still pressed against my chest. The knife was still in my other hand. I stared at it until my fingers began to tremble. At first, I wanted to drop it. Then, I remembered the figure's eyes. I remembered the way it danced. I remembered the sadness in its voice when it spoke about you. I understand now, my love. At least, I think I do. You were not only mine to lose. Something else had been watching you. Something else had listened when you laughed, watched when you danced, and waited whenever you felt trapped. Maybe it loved you in its own terrible way. Maybe grief opened a door between us. Maybe it came here because it could no longer bear being separated from you. And maybe that is why it left the knife. The house is quiet now. The sunlight is slowly moving across the floor. Soon it will reach the corner where the figure danced last night. I am still holding our photograph. I am still holding the knife. I get it now, my love. I think both of us will finally find you soon. Story 3. I'm posting this because I really need help. I have already tried everything I can think of. I soaked myself in hot water until my skin turned red. I stood under freezing cold showers until my whole body shook. I covered myself in aloe vera gel, moisturizing cream, antiseptic lotion, and anything else I could find in the bathroom cabinet. Nothing has worked. The itching is getting worse, and I don't know how much longer I can control myself. Let me explain everything from the beginning. I recently came back from a holiday in Greece with a group of friends. Before all of this started, it had honestly been one of the best trips of my life. The weather was beautiful every day. The sea was warm and clear, the food was incredible, and almost everyone we met was friendly. We spent our days on the beach and our evenings eating outside at little restaurants near the water. The only real problem was the sun. I'm a redhead, with pale skin and freckles covering most of my arms, shoulders, and face. I was the only ginger in our friendship group. I might even have been the only ginger on the entire island. Everyone else seemed to turn golden after a few hours outside, while I became pink before we had even finished breakfast. My friends kept telling me to be careful. They reminded me to put on more sunscreen every hour. They offered me hats, shirts, umbrellas, and towels. One of them even tried to force me to sit in the shade after noticing how red my shoulders had become. I refused. I hadn't paid for flights, a hotel, and a week in Greece just to spend the entire holiday hiding beneath an umbrella. I didn't want to be the boring one while everyone else swam, drank beer, played games, and enjoyed the sun. So I stayed with them. Every day, I went back to the beach. I sat in direct sunlight, drank cold beer, and laughed whenever my friends warned me that I was going to regret it. Sometimes I put on sunscreen, but not nearly as often as I should have. Most of the time, I forgot about it after the first few drinks. By the end of the holiday, my skin was bright pink. My shoulders felt tight whenever I moved my arms. My back burned when it touched the hotel bed sheets. Even putting on a shirt was painful, but I kept telling myself it was only sunburn. Everyone gets sunburned sometimes. It would hurt for a few days, peel a little, and then disappear. It wasn't until I returned home that I realized how badly I had burned myself. When I stepped off the plane, my skin was still giving off heat. I felt as though I had been cooked from the inside. My face was tender, my arms were swollen, and my back felt like it had been pressed against a hot metal surface. For the next couple of days, I covered myself in aloe vera gel. I used so much that my clothes stuck to my body. I kept the bottle in the refrigerator because the cold gel gave me a few seconds of relief. I would spread it across my chest, arms, shoulders, and legs, then stand in front of a fan, waiting for the burning to calm down. It must have been about 2 days after I got home when the peeling began. I was back at work by then, trying to return to normal life. I was sitting at my desk when I noticed a thin piece of skin lifting from my shoulder. It was almost transparent, like a small piece of dried glue. Without thinking, I caught the loose edge between my fingers and pulled. The skin came away easily. There was no pain, no blood, just a soft, satisfying release. I stared at the piece between my fingers. It was thin and delicate, with tiny freckles still visible across it. Beneath it, the new skin looked smoother and lighter. I should have thrown the piece away. Instead, I placed it carefully on my desk. After that, I couldn't stop looking for more. I found another loose edge near my upper arm and slowly pulled it downward. A larger strip came away, curling as it separated from my body. It reminded me of removing the protective plastic from the screen of a new phone. That clean, smooth feeling was strangely satisfying. I became completely absorbed in it. Then I found the perfect piece. It began near my elbow. I lifted the edge with my fingernail and pulled it slowly down my forearm. The skin separated in one long strip, passing over my wrist and continuing across the back of my hand. I had to move carefully to stop it from tearing. When it finally came free, I laid it flat on my desk. I stared at it for several minutes. It was perfect. The piece had kept the exact shape of part of my arm and hand. I could see my freckles trapped in it. The tiny lines of my fingerprints were still visible. Even the raised shape of an old scar had been preserved. I had never seen anything like it. After that, peeling became something I looked forward to. My hands were especially enjoyable. I would search along the sides of my fingers until I found a loose edge. Then I would pull it back as slowly as possible. There was always a slight feeling of pressure before the skin released, revealing soft, fresh flesh underneath. The feeling was difficult to describe. It wasn't painful. Not at first. It felt like scratching an itch that had been bothering me for hours. The relief only lasted for a moment, but that moment was enough to make me search for the next piece. Soon, the itching spread to my feet. At night, I would lie in bed and rub my feet together beneath the blankets. The skin was dry and rough, and the friction gave me some comfort. I would scratch one foot with the toes of the other, trying to reach an itch that seemed to move every time I found it. For some reason, the sound and movement relaxed me. I would rub my feet together slowly until I drifted off to sleep. One morning, I stood in the shower with my back facing the water. I had been ignoring the loose skin there because I couldn't reach it properly. Most of my shoulders and lower back were covered with large, dry patches that had started separating from the flesh beneath. The warm water found an opening near my shoulder. I felt it slide underneath the loose skin. The water spread slowly across my back, filling the space between the dead outer layer and the softer skin underneath. The loose skin swelled like a bubble. I could feel its weight pulling downward as more water collected inside it. Then it split. A wide sheet of skin slid down my back and landed near my feet. I watched it wash toward the drain. At the time, I was disappointed because I hadn't been able to save it. But when I think about it now, that might have been one of the best pulls I ever experienced. After that, I became determined to reach every part of my body. I used kitchen tongs to grab the loose pieces on my back. I stood in front of the mirror, twisting and stretching until I could catch an edge. Sometimes I spent nearly an hour trying to pull one section away without tearing it. When the itching became unbearable, I rubbed my back against the edge of a door frame. At first, the rough wood helped. I moved from side to side, pressing harder each time. Then, the metal lock scraped across my back. The pain was sharp enough to make me stop. When I looked in the mirror, I saw blood running down my side. For a few seconds, the itch disappeared. That should have frightened me. Instead, I felt relieved. I continued going to work until my manager asked me to stay home. At first, I think my coworkers were genuinely concerned about me. A few people said I was looking thinner. Someone asked whether I was ill. Another person suggested I should see a doctor because my face looked pale and stretched. Then, their concern slowly changed into disgust. I heard them whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. They said I smelled rotten. That was an exaggeration. I probably had a little body odor, but nothing worse than that. I had simply stopped showering properly because the water softened the skin too much. When it became wet, the pieces tore easily, and I wanted to keep them whole. People also started asking why I wore long-sleeved shirts every day. I told them I was embarrassed about the peeling. That was partly true, but it wasn't the real reason. The truth was that I knew I wouldn't be able to stop myself from pulling at my skin while I was working. I would be sitting at my computer, typing an email, when a small flake would fall from my wrist and land beside the keyboard. Every time that happened, I felt as though I was missing an opportunity. I started sneaking into the bathroom during work hours. I locked myself inside a stall and searched my arms, legs, and stomach for loose sections. Pulling off a few pieces gave me more relief than any cigarette break ever had. The only problem was when I found a really good piece. One afternoon, I removed my shoe in the bathroom and noticed that my sock had left a deep line around my lower leg. The pressure had created a perfect edge in the loose skin. I slipped my fingernail underneath it and pulled. The strip came away smoothly, starting near my ankle and moving up my calf. I kept pulling until it reached my knee. It remained completely intact. I knew I couldn't leave it at work. I placed it carefully inside my lunchbox so it wouldn't become torn or crushed. when I got home, I laid it flat with the others. It became my favorite piece in the entire collection. Part of my tattoo had come away with it. At first, I thought the ink would stay underneath the skin, but some of the color had been trapped inside the piece. It looked beautiful, like a thin sheet of painted glass. My collection had started by accident. I kept the first pieces because they were interesting. Then I began arranging them by size and shape. I stored smaller pieces in plastic bags. Larger ones were placed between sheets of paper or inside empty food containers. I kept the best pieces in a drawer beside my bed. The more I peeled, the more colorful the deeper layers became. My skin changed from pale pink to bright red. My tattoos seemed sharper and more vibrant for a while, almost as though they had been freshly done. Then parts of them began disappearing. Every new piece carried away more ink. A line vanished from my arm. A patch of color disappeared from my shoulder. Eventually, there was nothing left. All of my tattoos were gone. I remember standing in front of the mirror, looking at my raw body and thinking that I had become a fresh canvas. By then, the easy layers were almost finished. The deeper parts were more difficult. I started using tweezers to reach tight spaces around my fingers and toes. The skin over my knuckles was thick and tough. It came away in hard, callus-like lumps, but each piece preserved the tiny folds and creases of the joint. I liked those pieces. They looked almost alive when I held them between my fingers. My nails became a problem next. I had peeled so deeply along one finger that I could see the red skin of the nail bed. The area was swollen, but it still itched. I pushed the tweezers beneath the edge of the nail. Once I found the right angle, it lifted easily. The relief was incredible. My nails had been itching for days. I hadn't even known that nails could itch until then, but pulling them away seemed to release pressure from somewhere deep inside the finger. Soon, I removed the others. I didn't become truly worried until I woke one morning and found my little toe lying in the corner of the fitted bedsheet. There was no blood. That was the strangest part. The toe had simply come off during the night. I must have rubbed my feet together until it separated, but I hadn't felt anything. I picked it up and examined it. The skin was dry and gray. It felt lighter than I expected. I placed it with the rest of my collection, although I wasn't sure whether it deserved to be there. It wasn't particularly impressive. My big toe was different. When that one came away, I knew it belonged in the collection. It had kept its shape perfectly. After that, I didn't have to worry about deciding what counted as collection worthy. It wasn't long before I had a full collection. Fingers, toes, nails, skin, from almost every part of my body. I stopped caring about work, food, friends, or anything else. Peeling was more interesting than everything. I spent entire days sitting on my bedroom floor, searching my body for edges. Sometimes hours passed without me noticing. I would pull and scratch until darkness filled the room. One evening, my stomach growled loudly enough to wake me from one of those itching dazes. I looked down at my hand. I had peeled and scratched it completely raw. The muscles underneath were visible in places. Some of my fingers no longer moved properly. Still, I wasn't looking at the damage. I was staring at one small piece of skin trapped in the corner of my knuckle. I couldn't leave it there. I owned a small dental tool with a long, thin metal point. I usually used it to scratch between my teeth, but it was also useful for reaching small, awkward pieces that the tweezers couldn't grab. I pushed the point beneath the edge. This piece was deeper than the others. When I hooked the tool underneath it and pulled, I felt resistance. A sharp pain traveled through my hand and up my arm. For a moment, I thought I had finally removed the source of the itch. Then, it returned. I should have been disappointed. I should have been terrified. Instead, I only pushed the tool deeper. That was the first time I reached the bone. The itch wasn't on the surface anymore. It was inside the bone itself. I'm writing this using my right thumb. It is the only finger I have left that still works well enough to touch the screen. I'm lying in bed now, listening to the sound of my feet rubbing together beneath the blanket. Kirk, kirk, kirk. They don't feel soft anymore. They feel hard and uneven, but the movement still comforts me for a moment. The itch is everywhere now. I can feel it inside my arms, my legs, my chest, and my skull. It is no longer something on my skin. It is underneath everything. It is inside my bones. I grind my teeth together, trying to reach the itching inside them, but it never helps. Sometimes I push the dental tool between my gums and scrape along the roots. The relief lasts less than a second. My left hand is mostly bone now. There is no skin left. Hardly any muscle remains. The fingers have stopped moving, but they still itch. That is the part I cannot understand. How can something itch when there is nothing left to scratch? I stare at the bones whenever I begin to drift off. Maybe it is only the weak light from the screen. Maybe I am imagining it because I haven't slept properly in days. But I swear I can see thin edges forming along the bone. Small white layers are beginning to lift. I know I should be frightened. I know I should call someone. But all I can think about is sliding the metal point underneath one of those edges and pulling. I just hope there are enough layers left. I don't want to run out. Story 4. It was spring break during my junior year of college when my friends convinced me to go camping with them. The park they had chosen was about 2 hours north of our college. According to Henry, it was nothing like the crowded state parks filled with families, noisy children, and campers parked close together. This place was more isolated, surrounded by enormous redwood trees, narrow roads, and miles of untouched forest. Henry had been there before, and he would not stop talking about it. "You're not going to regret this," he told me several times. "The place is incredible. Trust me." Henry was one of my closest friends. He had grown up in Northern California, so he always seemed to know about hidden beaches, quiet hiking trails, swimming holes, and abandoned places that most people had never heard of. Camping, however, had never interested me. In fact, I had never been camping in my life. I was a city boy. My parents had never been interested in outdoor adventures, so I had grown up spending most of my free time inside. I preferred being warm in my bed, playing video games until my hands became stiff and my backside went numb. 4 solid walls stood between me and everything that crawled, scratched, hissed, or hunted outside. That was how I liked it. The idea of sleeping on the ground in the middle of a dark forest was not exactly appealing to me. However, I also did not want to spend the entire spring break alone. I could already imagine my friends sitting around a campfire, drinking beer, telling embarrassing stories, and laughing about things that would probably be mentioned for years afterward. Meanwhile, I would be sitting alone in my dorm room, surrounded by empty snack bags, wearing the same clothes for 3 days, staring at the ceiling, and thinking about how much fun they were having without me. Eventually, I gave in. "Fine," I said. Why not? At the time, I believed the worst things I would face were mosquitoes, an uncomfortable sleeping bag, using the bathroom behind a tree, and possibly waking up with a bear standing over me. I had no idea what I was really agreeing to. We packed our bags into James's Jeep and left early in the morning. There were 5 of us all together: James, Samuel, Emmanuel, Henry, and me. James drove. Samuel sat in the front passenger seat. Henry, Emmanuel, and I squeezed into the back. The drive began pleasantly enough. We played music, argued about where to stop for breakfast, and made jokes about Samuel's terrible singing. As the city disappeared behind us, houses became fewer, roads became narrower, and the landscape slowly changed. By the time we reached the forest, I had almost forgotten why I had been worried about camping. Massive redwoods stood on both sides of the road. Their trunks rose like giant pillars, disappearing into the thick canopy above us. Their branches stretched over the narrow road, blocking most of the early morning sunlight. I pressed my face against the cold window and tried to look all the way to the tops of the trees. Emmanuel laughed when he saw my nose and lips flattened against the glass, but I ignored him. I had seen redwoods before. They were common in that part of California, but I had never seen so many together, and I had certainly never traveled this deep into a forest. Some of the trunks were so wide that it would have taken 10 people holding hands to circle one. At first, the sight was beautiful. Then the road carried us deeper. The sunlight became weaker. Shadows covered the pavement. The trees seemed to move closer together, as though they were slowly closing behind us. The farther we traveled, the darker the forest became. An uncomfortable feeling began growing inside my stomach. I could not explain it. Nothing had happened, and there was no clear reason to be frightened, but I suddenly felt as though we were traveling somewhere we were not supposed to go. Naturally, my friends noticed. "Patrick, relax," Henry said, laughing. "They're just trees. I know they're trees. You're acting like we're driving into a horror movie. I'm not acting like anything." Henry turned slightly in his seat and smiled at me. "This place is unreal," he said. "There's a campsite near a stream. Sometimes you can see all kinds of wildlife there. You're studying zoology. This should be perfect for you." He reached across Emmanuel and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Trust me, by tomorrow you'll be thanking me." "I seriously doubt that." "You will." I laughed and shook my head, but the uneasy feeling remained. I turned back toward the window and watched the redwoods pass. Our campsite was still several miles away when James suddenly slammed his foot on the brakes. The Jeep stopped so violently that my body flew forward. The seat belt snapped tightly across my chest and knocked the breath out of me. A sharp pain spread through my ribs as I was thrown back into my seat. "What the hell?" I shouted, grabbing my chest. James did not answer. Samuel groaned from the front passenger seat and rubbed his face. "Damn it." I hit the dashboard. James looked at him angrily. "I told you to wear your seatbelt." Henry leaned forward between the front seats, trying to see through the windshield. Samuel stared ahead without moving. "Do you guys see that?" he asked. "Well, maybe I could if Henry moved his big head," Emmanuel said from the middle seat. "Shut up," Henry replied, laughing as he leaned back. I continued rubbing my chest, trying to calm the pain, but curiosity quickly became stronger than discomfort. I leaned toward the driver's side and carefully looked over James's shoulder. My eyes widened. "What is that?" I whispered. A deer lay directly in the middle of the road. It was dead. For several seconds, none of us spoke. The animal's body was badly damaged. Blood covered the road around it, forming dark pools that reflected the weak morning light. One of its legs was bent beneath its body, while another stretched unnaturally toward the edge of the road. "Damn," Emmanuel said quietly. "Poor thing." Samuel leaned closer to the windshield. "Do you think another car hit it?" "Obviously," James replied. Samuel shook his head. "You ever hear those stories about deer eating cigarette butts from the side of the road?" Henry looked at him. "What are you talking about?" "I heard that deer like the smell of cigarettes," Samuel continued. "They walk onto the road to eat the butts. Then the tobacco messes with their brains, and they freeze when a car comes. Henry stared at him for a moment. That is not true. It absolutely is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Children, stop, James said. Samuel tried to hold back his laughter. Seeing his expression made the rest of us laugh too. James waited a few seconds before turning around. You know what? He said. I think Samuel might be right. Samuel pointed excitedly at him. Thank you. See? I'm not crazy. You are both crazy, Henry said. They continued arguing about whether deer ate cigarette butts, but their voices slowly faded from my attention. I could not stop staring at the animal. There was something about it that felt wrong. Hey man, Emmanuel's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked at him. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I'm fine. You sure? I glanced back through the windshield. There's just so much blood. Emmanuel looked toward the deer. Yeah, he said quietly. There is. James checked the rearview mirror. We can't stay stopped in the middle of the road. Another car might come around the corner and hit us. Then none of us will be reaching the campsite. He carefully drove around the deer and continued until he found a wider section of road where he could safely pull over. We had not traveled far. The deer was still visible behind us, although the shadows made it difficult to see clearly. Maybe the car that hit it is still nearby, I said. I doubt it, Henry replied. I turned toward him. What do you mean? Look at the size of that deer. A car would have to hit it hard to cause that much damage. The vehicle might have gone off the road. Everyone became quiet. The driver could be hurt, I continued. They might be trapped somewhere. James turned around and looked at me. Are you suggesting we get out and become a search party? I'm suggesting we make sure nobody is dying in a ditch. Emmanuel nodded. He might be right. We should at least check. Samuel sighed. Fine, let's make sure no one needs help. One by one, we opened the doors and climbed out. Samuel was the only person who had not needed to unfasten a seatbelt. Before entering the road, we checked both directions for traffic. There were no cars, no distant engines, and no signs that anyone else had passed through the area recently. We slowly walked back toward the deer. Samuel rubbed his face as we went. I could have broken my nose, he said. I guess seatbelt safety really is important. We looked at him with annoyance, but a few of us still laughed. As we approached the deer, the laughter disappeared. At first, we kept our distance. We were not sure what we were searching for, but we began by examining the road. If a vehicle had struck the animal and gone into the forest, there should have been evidence. Tire marks, broken branches, damaged bushes. Something there, Samuel said, pointing at the pavement. We gathered around him. Dark tire marks crossed the road. We followed them for several meters, expecting them to lead toward the trees. Instead, they suddenly ended. We stood there staring at the pavement. That's strange, Emmanuel said. I searched both sides of the road. There were no broken branches, damaged trees, or flattened bushes. There was no car hidden among the redwoods. There was nothing. Emmanuel looked back toward the deer. Should we move it out of the road? He asked. We don't see any sign of a car. James nodded. We probably should. Otherwise, someone else might come around the corner and hit it again. We began walking toward the animal. Wait, Samuel said, raising one hand. We stopped. That thing could be carrying a disease, he continued. We shouldn't touch it with our bare hands. I'll check the Jeep for gloves. Good idea, James said. I'll be right back. Samuel jogged toward the Jeep while the rest of us remained near the deer. Henry looked at me. You never answered the question. What question? Do deer actually go onto roads to eat cigarette butts? You're the zoology student. I stared at him. Honestly, I'm not sure. Henry smiled. Some zoology student. Shut up. We laughed. Then the smell reached us. All four of us covered our noses at the same time. What the hell is that? Henry shouted. The smell was more than unpleasant. It was thick and rotten, as though it had weight. It filled my mouth and coated the back of my throat. I could almost taste it. We quickly moved away from the deer. I bent forward, gagging, and fought to keep my breakfast inside my stomach. The deer didn't smell like that before, I said through my shirt. Everyone looked at me. What? Emmanuel asked. It didn't smell when we drove past it. Why does it smell like this now? We moved several more steps away. Jesus Christ, Emmanuel said, pulling his collar over his nose. James did the same. For a moment, we stood silently and stared at the deer. The smell reminded me of an animal that had been dead for days, possibly weeks. However, the blood surrounding the body looked fresh. At least, I thought it looked fresh. Emmanuel, go and get Samuel, James said. He's taking too long. I can go, I offered. No one answered. Our attention had returned to the deer. Something was not right. I was studying zoology, not forensic science. But I knew enough to understand that a recently killed animal should not smell as though it had been rotting for weeks. There was another problem. Why had none of us smelled it when we passed in the Jeep? The others remained at a distance, but my curiosity became stronger than my fear. I walked to the side of the road and picked up a long fallen branch. As I moved toward the deer, Henry grabbed my arm. Dude, don't. I'm not going to touch it. Then what are you doing? I just want to look at something. That's disgusting. It's fine. I have a stick. I raised the branch to show him, although I did not feel nearly as confident as I sounded. I pulled my shirt over my nose and slowly approached the animal. The smell became stronger with every step. My stomach twisted and my eyes began watering. I gripped the branch with both hands and tried not to breathe. When I reached the deer, I stopped. I pressed the end of the branch against its body. Nothing happened. I pushed harder. A piece of damaged flesh shifted. I swallowed and used the stick to pull back the tissue covering its chest. That was when I saw the hole. A large, empty opening had been torn through the center of the deer's body. I stared into it. Something was terribly wrong. I knew enough about teeth and bite patterns to recognize common signs of an animal attack. I searched for them, but there were none. No clear bite marks. No puncture wounds. No claw marks. There was simply a massive hole where most of the deer's organs should have been. It looked less like something had eaten the animal and more like something had emptied it. For one disturbing second, another thought entered my mind. It looked as though something had been wearing the deer. I immediately stepped back. Patrick? Henry called. What is it? I don't know. James threw his hands into the air. That's it. They're taking too long. I'm going back to get the gloves myself. He began walking toward the Jeep, shaking his head. We should already be at the campsite, drinking beer and laughing. Samuel and Emmanuel are probably messing around over there. Henry laughed. Bring the gloves this time, he shouted. James raised his middle finger without turning around. I laughed and watched him continue down the road. When I looked back, only Henry and I remained near the deer. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Henry glanced at the animal and then at me. You know, he said, I'm starting to think camping might not be for you. Thank you for convincing me to come. This has become a complete disaster. I thought you wanted to leave your comfort zone. I've changed my mind. Of course you have. He shook his head, but continued smiling. We're still going to have a great time. Trust me, the campsite is magnificent. I gave him a doubtful look. I'm serious, he said. Look at these trees. Now imagine sitting among them beside a fire with cold beers and a scream ripped through the forest. Scroosh! The sound was so loud that it echoed along the road and through the trees. Henry stopped speaking. I froze. Slowly, we turned toward the direction of the jeep. The scream came again. Scroosh! Samuel, Henry shouted. No one answered. My breathing became heavier. What the hell was that? I asked. Henry did not respond. James. He shouted. Nothing. I dropped the branch. Fear tightened around my chest. The pressure reminded me of the seatbelt striking my ribs when James had stopped the jeep. The pain, the weight, the feeling of having all the air knocked out of me. Henry, he started walking toward the jeep. Then he began jogging. The scream came again. Scraash! Henry, wait. He moved faster. Henry, he broke into a full sprint. I tried to follow, but my legs refused to move. I could hear him shouting the others' names. Emmanuel. Samuel. James. There was no answer. My lungs felt tight. My feet seemed frozen to the pavement. Move, I told myself. All I had to do was move. Just one step, then another. Move. I whispered. The scream echoed again. Henry was already far down the road. Finally, my body obeyed. I ran after him. The redwoods seemed to press closer with every step. My vision blurred from the morning mist, the smell of the deer, and the tears forming in my eyes. The shadows beneath the trees appeared darker and longer. They stretched across the road like thin hands reaching for my feet. Scrar. The sound was closer now. Henry. Slow down. I held my chest and continued running. Then Henry disappeared. One moment he was ahead of me. The next, he was gone. I stopped. The jeep was no longer visible. Henry? No answer. I turned around. The road behind me looked different. It appeared longer than before and much darker. The redwoods leaned over it, their branches forming a tunnel of almost complete blackness. Henry. Nothing, Samuel. Emmanuel. James. Silence. Stop it. I shouted. This isn't funny. My voice echoed through the forest. The screaming had stopped. I turned in circles, searching for something familiar. There were only trees, shadows, darkness, and the deer still lying in the road. Where are you? I shouted. My voice sounded weak beneath the towering redwoods. I waited for someone to laugh. I waited for Henry to call me an idiot. I expected Samuel to jump from behind a tree or James to appear beside the jeep. Nothing happened. My heart pounded harder. The jeep was gone. Henry was gone. All of them were gone. A cold feeling traveled through my body as the truth settled inside me. I was alone, completely alone. I looked toward the forest and noticed how many places there were for something to hide. Behind every tree, between every shadow, inside the darkness, beyond the road. A rustling sound came from behind me. I spun around. Henry? My voice was barely a whisper. Nothing stood there. Only the deer remained. I did not want to go near it again. Something inside me screamed that I should stay away, but I could not remain where I was. I ran back toward the animal and stopped in the middle of the road. Henry. Nothing. James. My voice cracked. Samuel. Emmanuel. I turned around desperately. Where are you? Tears filled my eyes. Stop messing around. I'm scared. Nothing answered. I don't want to do this anymore. My voice broke. Please. Then the entire forest became silent, not quiet. Silent. There were no birds, no insects, no wind moving through the branches. There was nothing except the sound of my own breathing. The silence was worse than the screaming. The burning pain in my chest became stronger. I looked toward the place where the Jeep should have been and began walking. The farther I traveled, the farther away everything seemed to become. I walked faster. The road stretched ahead of me. I began running. It stretched farther. The trees bent inward, and the road seemed to twist beneath my feet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I needed to call someone. Anyone. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it. Shit. I bent down, grabbed it, and looked around. The deer was still behind me. I turned away and took another step. Something cracked beneath my shoe. I froze. Tears rolled down my face. I could no longer pretend that I was not terrified. I did not want to look down. My breathing became heavy. Slowly I lowered my head. An arm lay beneath my foot. Most of the skin had been torn away, exposing white bone. The elbow was bent backwards at an impossible angle. I fell and scrambled away on my hands and feet. Oh God. The road had become too dark to see clearly. My phone, I whispered. Where's my phone? I searched the ground with both hands. My fingers touched something wet. Soft, warm. I grabbed what I believed was my phone with one hand and turned on the flashlight. My other hand remained pressed against something I could not see. The smell told me what it was before the light did. I screamed and pulled my hand away. Blood covered my fingers. I turned aside and vomited onto the road. No, I whispered. No, my mind raced. Whatever I had touched was something impossible, disgusting, and wrong. I tried to stand, but my legs would not support me. My entire body shook. The blood made my phone slippery, and it fell from my hand. The flashlight beam spun through the darkness before stopping on something ahead of me. It landed on James. At first, I felt relief. James, I said, why did you guys leave me? I crawled toward him. Then the light moved across his body. I stopped. Only half of him was there. My hand flew to my mouth. More tears rolled down my face. Please stop, I whispered. I closed my eyes tightly. Why are you showing me this? Something touched my shoulder. I stopped breathing. The hand was cold and felt almost like a claw. Sharp tips pressed through my clothes and dug into my skin. The air around me became heavy. I tried to breathe, but my lungs would not fill. Slowly I turned. Henry? His body was twisted behind me. His head was bent at an angle no living person could survive. Then I saw everything else. Bodies, pieces of bodies. Some appeared old. Others looked fresh. They surrounded me on both sides of the road. I dropped my phone again. The flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Stop, I whispered. Something moved nearby. Please, I closed my eyes and grabbed my painful chest. Something ran past me. A sharp object scratched my face, and warm blood rolled down my cheek. A wet, gurgling noise came from the darkness. Grillrook. It was not the scream. This sound was different. It was closer. Branches tore across my skin. They pulled at my clothes and scratched my arms, neck, and face. Something tried to grab me. Stop! I screamed. I swung my arms blindly. Why are you doing this? Something pulled me backwards. I kicked and fought against it. Then I noticed a small light ahead of me. A weak glow shone between the trees. I forced myself to stand and ran toward it. Branches struck my face. My legs burned. My chest felt as though it were being torn apart from the inside. My lungs were collapsing. but the light became brighter. Closer, closer, then I heard voices. "James, look out." Emmanuel screamed. Tires shrieked against the road. "What the hell are you doing?" Samuel shouted. The Jeep swerved. It tipped onto one side. Gravel and dirt hammered beneath us as the vehicle left the road. Branches smashed against the windshield and scraped along the doors. There was a heavy impact. Then another. Glass exploded. Metal crushed inward. Everything became white. Opening my eyes felt impossible. My eyelids were heavy, but I eventually forced them apart. I was upside down. For several seconds, I could not understand what I was seeing. The ground appeared to be above me. Broken glass covered what had once been the roof of the Jeep beneath my head. My seat belt was tight across my chest, holding my body in place and stopping me from falling. I tried to breathe. Pain exploded through me. I looked down. A thick, broken branch had entered the Jeep and pierced straight through my chest. I tried to call for help, but no sound came out. My mouth was completely dry. My throat burned. I had lost a great deal of blood. When I attempted to move, the branch held me firmly in place. Then the smell reached me. I knew that smell. It was the same rotten smell that had come from the deer. Death, I slowly turned my head. Emmanuel was beside me. His neck was broken, and his head hung unnaturally to one side. One arm was twisted upward into the crushed metal of the Jeep. I looked toward Henry. His body had been folded against the other side of the back seat like a piece of paper. One of the deer's antlers had pierced through the wreckage and entered his body. I wanted to look away, but I could not. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. "No," I whispered. The word barely escaped my lips. I tried to move again. The branch inside me sent another wave of pain through my chest. Through the remains of the windshield, I searched for Samuel. He was not inside the Jeep. Then I looked toward James. He remained in the driver's seat, or what was left of it. I closed my eyes. That was when I remembered. The memories returned slowly. Not all at once, piece by piece. We had been traveling close to 80 miles per hour when the deer appeared in the road. James had seen it too late. His body jerked forward as he slammed his foot on the brake. The tires screamed. The Jeep shook violently. We all shouted. Then we hit the deer. The impact was deafening. The windshield exploded. Samuel had not been wearing his seatbelt. He flew forward through the broken glass as the deer's body crashed through the front of the Jeep. Its antlers tore into James. James's hand slipped from the steering wheel. The Jeep swerved and left the road. We struck one tree, then another. My body snapped painfully against the seatbelt. Glass shattered around us. Metal folded inward. Branches entered through the broken windows, stabbing and cutting anything they reached. I remembered the branch entering my chest. I remembered Emmanuel being thrown sideways. I remembered the Jeep spinning. I remembered seeing the sky. Then the ground. Then the trees. Then the sky again. The Jeep rolled. My head struck something hard. Pain filled my entire body. Then there had been silence. I opened my eyes again. No one was speaking. No one was laughing. No one was arguing about cigarette butts. I looked at my friends. Samuel had never gone back to the Jeep for gloves. Emmanuel had never followed him. James had never walked away from the deer. Henry had never run down the road. They had never disappeared. They had been inside the wreckage the entire time. Dead. I had been there with them. Alone? No, I whispered. My lips trembled. No, 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 I called Henry's name. Nothing. I called Emmanuel. Then Samuel. then James. I knew they were dead. I could see that they were dead, but I continued calling their names because I needed one of them to answer. Just one. Please, I whispered. Please, guys. Nothing moved. The truth frightened me more than anything I had experienced on the road. The road had never existed. There had been no search, no gloves, no running through the forest. I had never left the Jeep. My body felt weak. My mouth was so dry that I could barely move my tongue. I had no food, no water. Blood continued leaking from the wound around the branch. The smell inside the Jeep told me that we had been there for a long time. Nearly 2 weeks. For almost 2 weeks I had been drifting in and out of consciousness, trapped upside down inside the wrecked Jeep with a branch buried through my body. I had imagined everything. The deer in the road, my friends walking around, the scream, the bodies, the endless forest. None of it had been real. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. Then something moved between the trees. I stopped breathing. A dark shape passed behind one of the redwoods. Then it moved behind another tree. Closer, I stared through the shattered windshield. The scream tore through the forest again. Scraash! It sounded like an animal's cry, mixed with a human scream. It was the same sound that had followed me through my hallucinations. Something stepped out from behind the trees. It moved slowly and appeared injured. It limped toward the wreckage, dragging something behind it. My chest tightened. I recognized the shape. I remembered the cold hand, the claw-like fingers pressing into my shoulder. The creature came closer. Scrape. Something dragged across the forest floor. Scrape. It moved nearer. Scrape. I narrowed my eyes and tried to focus. A broken section of the deer's antlers dragged behind the shadow. That was when I understood. The deer had not wandered into the road. It had not been eating cigarette butts. It had not stepped in front of us by accident. It had been placed there. Something had been waiting for us. The creature stopped near my side of the Jeep. Through the darkness, I could make out its feet. They were hooves. Its arms were long, thin, and badly damaged. Blood covered them. One hand held the broken antler that dragged behind it. I looked at my friends. Samuel, James, Henry, Emmanuel. For 2 weeks, I had believed that I was the only living thing left in the forest. But perhaps I had never been alone. Perhaps it had remained near the wreckage the entire time, waiting, watching, collecting them one by one. And now only one person remained. Me. The creature moved closer to the broken window. Its long body bent as it slowly crouched beside me. The same scream that had followed me through my dreams ripped through the forest once more. Only this time, I knew I was awake. And it had finally come to collect me too. Story 5. Mama always told me that I had been born with my eyes closed. She said it as if it were nothing unusual, just one of those strange little things that could happen when a baby entered the world. Some babies need more time, she would whisper whenever I asked her about it. Her fingers would move gently over my eyelids, tracing the edges with careful, cool touches. Your eyes are just taking longer than most. There's no reason to rush them, baby. I had heard that answer so many times that for most of my life, I believed it. I was 8 years old, and I had never seen anything. My whole world was made from sounds, smells, textures, and Mama's voice. I knew the house through the soles of my feet and the tips of my fingers. I knew the distance between my bed and the wall. I knew that it took 12 small steps to reach my bedroom door, then another 9 to reach the hallway. I knew where the floor dipped near the kitchen, and where the wood splintered beside the bathroom entrance. The floor in my bedroom creaked in 6 places. I had counted them years ago, and I could cross the room without making a sound when I wanted to. I had learned to move around the house the way other children probably learned to move around a playground. I could avoid the loose boards, the sharp corners, and the places where the walls felt damp enough to leave cold moisture on my fingertips. The smell of the house was one of my oldest memories. Wet wood, mildew, dust. There was also something sweet hiding beneath those smells, but not a pleasant sweetness. It reminded me of fruit that had been left in a bowl for too long, turning soft and black while no one bothered to throw it away. When I was younger, I asked Mama why the house smelled that way. Old houses have old smells, she had told me. It doesn't mean anything. I believed her then. At night, the walls made noises. They groaned slowly, sometimes for several seconds at a time, as if something huge was shifting its weight beneath the house. The ceiling cracked and popped. Water dripped somewhere beyond my bedroom wall, even when it had not rained. "The house is breathing," Mama would say whenever the sounds frightened me. I pictured the house as a sleeping animal, its wooden body rising and falling around us. I imagined that it protected us from the world outside. I used to believe everything Mama told me. Part of me still wanted to. Every night followed the same routine. Mama would lead me to my bed, even though I knew the way. She would pull the blanket over my legs and smooth it down carefully. Then she would sit beside me for a few moments, her weight causing the mattress to sink. Before she left, I always asked the same question. "Mama, are my eyes open or closed right now?" I did not know why I kept asking. Maybe I hoped that one night her answer would be different. Maybe I wanted her to laugh and tell me that I had finally opened them without realizing it. But her answer never changed. "Closed, baby," she would say in that soft, calm voice. "Still closed. That's how we keep you safe." Safe, she never explained what I needed protection from. When I asked, she would stroke my hair and tell me not to worry. She said children did not need to understand everything. She said that some knowledge was too heavy for young minds. There were many things about Mama that I tried not to question. Her hands were one of them. They were gentle, but there was something unusual about the way they moved. Mama did not touch my face with the uncertain tenderness of someone afraid of hurting her child. Her fingers were too controlled, too exact. Every movement seemed practiced, as if she had done the same thing hundreds of times before. Each morning, she checked my eyelids. She would sit me upright in bed and run her fingers along the skin, pressing lightly near the corners. Sometimes she seemed satisfied. Other times she would make a quiet sound in her throat, almost like disappointment. On those mornings, she reached for the small metal box she kept on a high shelf. I had never touched the box, but I knew its sound. The lid opened with a light click. Something inside shifted with a faint scrape. Then I heard a thin strand being pulled tight. After that came the pinch. It was always near the corner of one eye. A quick, sharp pain followed by a warm sting. Sometimes I felt a drop of moisture slide down my cheek. Mama would wipe it away before I could touch it. Then she kissed my forehead. "There," she would say, "all better." When I was 6, I asked what she kept inside the box. "Medicine," she answered. "What kind of medicine?" "The kind that helps you heal." "Heal from what?" Her hand closed around my wrist. It was the first time I realized how strong she was. Her fingers tightened until the bones in my wrist pressed together painfully. She stayed silent for several seconds, and in that silence, I heard her breathing change. "You don't need to remember," she finally said. Her voice was no longer gentle. It was quiet, but there was something hard beneath it. "I don't remember anything," I told her. "I know," she replied. "That's my job. I remember for you." Then she released my wrist. A moment later, her soft voice returned. She apologized for squeezing too hard and gave me an extra piece of bread with breakfast. But the words stayed with me. "I remember for you." For 2 years, that sentence had lived inside my chest like a swallowed stone. I could not understand it, and I could not get rid of it. Sometimes, late at night, I heard Mama talking in the kitchen. At first, I thought she was speaking to someone on the telephone. I had heard about telephones in the stories she told me, though I had never used one. She said they allowed people to speak across long distances. One afternoon, while she was outside, I searched the kitchen walls for a cord or a receiver. I found nothing. There was no telephone in the house. Mama had been speaking to herself. Her voice was always too low for me to understand every word. I could only hear pieces. "I'm sorry. I had no choice. Please forgive me." Sometimes she repeated the same sentence for several minutes, as though she were practicing it. It did not sound like a mother speaking to her child. It sounded like someone preparing an apology for a person who would never be able to hear it. Even then, I never doubted that Mama loved me. I need to make that clear. She fed me, she washed my hair, she held me when thunder shook the walls. When I became sick, she slept beside my bed and placed cool cloths on my forehead. She sang to me in a voice that was not beautiful, but always made me feel safe. Whatever secrets she kept, I believed her love was real. After what happened tonight, I no longer know what I am allowed to believe. The evening began like every other evening. Mama gave me a bowl of thin soup and a piece of hard bread. Afterward, she washed my hands in a basin of cold water and guided me back to my bedroom. The house seemed quieter than usual. There were no groans from the walls, no dripping water. Even the wind outside had stopped. Mama tucked me into bed. She pulled the blanket to my knees and smoothed it several times, as if she needed every wrinkle to disappear. Then she kissed me on the forehead. Her lips felt dry. Her weight lifted from the mattress. "Mama?" I asked. "Yes, baby. Are my eyes open or closed?" She was already moving toward the door. "Closed, baby. Still closed." There was a pause. "That's how we keep you safe." The door clicked shut. I listened to her footsteps moving down the hallway. She stepped over the first noisy board, but pressed down on the second. It groaned beneath her weight. Then her steps grew softer and softer until the house swallowed them completely. I lay still beneath the blanket. That was when the itching began. It started in the inner corner of my left eye. At first, it was only a faint irritation, something I could ignore, but it quickly became stronger. The itch felt deep, almost beneath the skin, in the place where Mama's thread always pulled the tightest. I raised my hand and pressed my palm against my eye. "Don't," I whispered to myself. Mama had warned me never to scratch. She said my eyelids were delicate and still healing. She said touching them could make the damage worse. The itching spread. It became hot and sharp, as if a tiny insect were trapped beneath the skin, trying to crawl free. My fingernails moved closer. "Don't," I repeated. But something was different that night. The corner of my eyelid did not feel as tight as usual. There was a small gap where the skin should have been firmly held together. When I touched it, something thin shifted beneath my fingertip. A knot. The thread had loosened. My heart began to beat faster. I knew I should call for Mama. She would come with her metal box. She would repair whatever had broken. She would kiss my forehead and tell me everything was fine. Instead, I scratched. There was a soft, tearing sound. It reminded me of old cloth splitting along a seam. A sudden wet pain cut through the corner of my eye, and something cold slid out from beneath the lid. The thread fell across my cheek. Then my eyelid opened. For one terrible second, I did not understand what was happening. Something rushed into me. It had no smell, no sound, and no shape that I could understand. It hurt so badly that I almost screamed. I raised both hands to my face, but before I could cover the eye again, the pain faded enough for confusion to take its place. Light. That had to be what it was. I had imagined light thousands of times. In my mind, it had always been warm and golden. Mama described sunlight as something soft that touched your skin. She said mornings filled the house with brightness and made the rooms feel alive. The light entering my eye was nothing like that. It was gray, weak, and sick looking. It filtered down from above through holes in the ceiling. At first, I could not understand what I was seeing. Everything was made of blurred shapes and shadows. My eye watered, and the room seemed to twist whenever I moved my head. I blinked several times. The shapes slowly became clearer. The ceiling was not smooth. Parts of it had collapsed. Dark strips hung through the openings. Some looked like roots, others looked like wires or pieces of rotten wood. Water stains spread across the remaining boards in large black patches. I turned my head. For the first time in my life, I saw my bedroom. There was no soft wallpaper, though Mama had told me it was covered with small yellow flowers. There was no clean rug beside the bed. There was no lamp with a warm shade glowing on the table. The room was a rotting shell. The walls were cracked and swollen with moisture. Large pieces had peeled away, exposing black wooden boards underneath. Thin trails of water ran down one corner. Mold covered the lower half of the room in dark, spreading clouds. My bed was not the comfortable wooden bed I had imagined. It was a narrow metal frame, with rust eating through the bars. The mattress beneath me was stained and thin. The blanket Mama tucked around me every night was gray, torn, and covered in marks I could not identify. My stomach tightened. I looked toward the place where I believed the bedroom wall should have been. There was a wide opening instead. Part of the wall had collapsed long ago, giving me a clear view into another section of the house. The hallway beyond it leaned slightly to one side. The floorboards were black with dampness, and some had fallen away completely. Then I noticed the far corner of my room. For 8 years I had slept only a few feet away from it. A row of cribs stood against the wall. At first, I thought there were 4. Then my eye adjusted, and I counted 6. Maybe 7. Some were pushed so closely together that their rusted bars touched. Dust covered them. The mattresses inside had collapsed. Torn pieces of cloth lay across them like dead leaves. The cribs were small enough for babies, though a few looked large enough to hold children close to my age. Some were empty, some were not. In one crib, I saw a small shape beneath a gray blanket. Something pale rested near the edge of the mattress. It might have been a hand. In another crib, dark strands hung through the bars, tangled with dust. I forced myself to look away before my mind could understand more. My breathing became fast and shallow. I was not the first child who had lived in that room. The truth entered me all at once. Mama's metal box had not been used only on me. Her careful hands had performed the same work before. She had sewn other eyelids shut. She had checked the stitches every morning. She had pulled the thread tight whenever it came loose. Closed, baby. Still closed. The words had not been created for me. She had repeated them to the children in those cribs. She had whispered them night after night until the sentence became smooth and automatic. until she could say it without her voice shaking. I stared at the cribs and tried to count how many children had come before me. Had they all lived here? Had they all believed her? Had they asked the same questions? I wondered what had happened when their stitches came loose. A sound came from the hallway, a long creak. The floorboard 6 steps from my door. Every part of my body became still. Mama had heard something. Maybe she had heard the thread tear. Maybe she had heard my breathing change. Maybe she had known the moment my eye opened. A second floorboard groaned. She was coming back. I should have closed my eye. I knew that. I could have pulled the loose thread away and pressed my eyelid shut. I could have hidden beneath the blanket and pretended nothing had happened. When Mama entered, I could have asked my usual question and accepted her usual answer. Closed, baby. Still closed. That was what she needed me to be. Blind, obedient, safe. But I had already seen the room. I had seen the broken ceiling, the rotten walls, and the line of cribs. I had seen enough to know that closing my eye would not erase the truth. Her footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle turned slowly. The door opened. Mama stood in the doorway. For a moment, my mind refused to recognize her. I had built a picture of Mama from 8 years of touch. In my imagination, she was tall and strong. Her face was smooth, her hair was neat, and her smile was gentle. The woman in the doorway looked broken. One of her eyes was swollen shut. The skin around it was dark purple and black, spreading across the side of her face. Her lower lip was split. Dried blood marked her chin. Bruises covered her neck. Some were old and yellow, others were deep blue. A few looked fresh and red, as if someone's fingers had pressed into her skin only hours ago. Her dress hung loosely from her body. One sleeve was torn. Her arms rested at her sides, but her hands trembled constantly. She looked as if every part of her was being held together by a thin piece of string. Then I saw the knife. It was buried in the side of her neck just beneath her jaw. The blade had not gone in deeply. Only the tip had entered her skin. A narrow line of blood ran down her neck and disappeared into the collar of her dress. Mama did not scream. She did not reach for the knife. She barely seemed to notice it. Her one open eye stared at me from across the room. There was fear in it. There was also sorrow. Behind her, something filled the doorway. At first, I thought it was a person. It was too tall to stand normally beneath the hallway ceiling, so it bent slightly at the neck. Its arms were long and thin, hanging almost to its knees. Its skin looked pale in the weak gray light, but parts of it seemed darker, as though the body had been built from pieces that did not belong together. Its face was the worst part. I could see eyes, a nose, and a mouth, but none of them seemed to sit correctly. Every time it moved, the face looked different. From one angle, it appeared almost human. From another, it seemed like someone had tried to create a person after only hearing one described. One of its hands rested behind Mama's shoulder. The other held the knife. I finally understood. Mama had not sewn my eyes shut to hide me from the world. She had done it to hide the world from me. Maybe she believed that if I could not see the creature, it would not notice me. Maybe the stitches were not punishment but protection. Perhaps the other children had opened their eyes too soon. Perhaps that was why the cribs were empty, or why some of them were not. Mama's lips moved. "Oh, baby," she whispered. Her voice sounded wet and broken, nothing like the calm voice she had used every night of my life. "You weren't supposed to see this part." The creature behind her slowly tilted its head. Its eyes moved from Mama to me. A smile began to form across its face. stretching wider than any human smile should. Mama took one small step into the room. The knife moved with her. Fresh blood ran down her neck. I wanted to call her name. I wanted to run to her, but my body would not move. I remained frozen beneath the blanket, staring through the eye that should never have opened. For the first time, I understood what Mama had meant whenever she said she was keeping me safe. For the first time, I wished I had listened. The creature's long fingers curled around the edge of the door. Mama's good eye never left mine. There was an apology in her expression, the same apology she had practiced alone in the kitchen night after night. "I'm sorry, I had no choice. Please forgive me." The creature leaned closer to her ear. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the door began to swing shut. Mama remained in the narrowing gap, her damaged face disappearing piece by piece. First the trembling hand, then the torn dress, then the bruises around her neck. Her eye was the last thing I saw. It stayed fixed on mine until the door closed completely. The latch clicked, darkness returned, but it was not the darkness I had known before. Before, darkness had been my whole world. It had felt endless, familiar, and safe. Now I knew what waited inside it. I sat in silence, listening. At first, I heard nothing. Then came the slow sound of metal scraping against wood outside the door. A moment later, Mama began to cry. She tried to keep quiet, but I heard every broken breath. Another voice whispered beside her. It was too low for me to understand the words. The handle of my bedroom door slowly began to turn again, and this time, Mama was not the one opening it.